Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Vizniak, and today I'm going to take you through the number of joints in the body. The simple answer is 472 plus or minus anatomical variation. I know. You can go onto Google and show me a different number. I am literally going to walking through them right now. So I have had this list inspected by two PhD professors at the University of British Columbia, as well as another professor at the University of Western States. I've also had hundreds of undergrad students look at this. They get angry when I make them go through this list to verify it, but it's been verified by hundreds of people. And all this information is presented in our little muscle manual book that is required reading at numerous colleges and universities around the world. So the first thing to get is 472 joints in the body. I know other sources say other things. I am literally going to walk you through them. First, we'll start off by defining how many bones are in the body. Then we'll define what different joint types are. And then we'll go ahead and count all those joints out. Does it sound like fun? It is going to be fun. One of my favorite topics, actually. So I love teaching anatomy, so hopefully you will get some enjoyment out of this as well. So number one. First of all, to begin with, how many bones are in the body? There are 472, no, there's not. There's 214 bones in your body. And everybody says, no, there's 206, because that's what the Guinness Book of World Records says. I have emailed the Guinness Book of World Records numerous times. It's 214. What do people forget? They forget the sesamoid bones on the thumb and the sesamoid bones underneath your big toe. There are 8 sesamoid bones in those locations on your body. And if you don't believe they exist, go and look at any x-ray of the hand or foot, or ask anybody who's had sesamoiditis and they will tell you all about it. The other thing to realize for bones is there's lots of potential for extra bones to be in your body. So places where you can have extra bones. You can have extra bones in your neck. You can have cervical rib. You can have lumbar ribs. You can have an L6 lumbar vertebrae that's a non-fusion of the upper part of the sacrum. Extra bones in the skull. Wormian bones, or what else are they known as? Sutural bones. And you can also have extra bones anywhere else in your body where secondary ossification centers don't join together. So I'll flash up an MRI or x-ray of myself right here in a second, and you can actually see one of my lumbar vertebrae. I have a little extra bone on one of my lumbar vertebrae. It's a common thing that's out there, but for the basic level, you have 214 bones in your body. If we progress in, then we have to define joints. And now what is a joint is the first thing we have to get. So to understand this, I'm not talking about the joints you put in your body on the weekend. How many joints are in your body? Zing, zing. That's a dad joke right there. All right, what do you have to get? You have to get that we classify joints in different ways. For the purpose of this discussion, I am going to classify a joint as a point where one bone meets another bone. That is an articulation. Now, if we look into the skull, there's points where a bone meets and there's a little space and the bones meet again, and that creates a little foramen right there, but that we're still going to call the same articulation. If it makes a foramen, it's still considered the same joint. We didn't give that any special consideration. All right, so on a basic level, how do we break down joints? I think I can zoom into this a little bit more. We break down joints into joints with synovial fluid or with a cavity or without a cavity. So looking at this, I can see fibrous joints and I can see synovial joints. Within our fibrous joints, we have a synarthrosis and an amphiarthrosis. Synarthrosis are things like sutures, and cartilaginous or synchondrosis. These are your epiphyseal growth centers. They disappear relatively quickly after you reach skeletal maturity. They become epiphyseal growth plates later on. So the other thing to get here is a gomphosis. And a gomphosis is where your tooth meets your maxilla or your mandible in the lower portion. Technically, your tooth is not a bone, but it's still a firm structure that meets. If you take the teeth out, you get 456-ish joints, or we're at 472 with the teeth. Okay, then I can see amphiarthrosis, and there you have a syndesmosis and a fibrocartilaginous classification. Syndesmosis are syndesmotic ankle sprains, and these syndesmotic ankle sprains occur as high joint ankle sprains. So you might hear of a high sprain, or like the distal tibial fibular joint is going to be that, where someone does a high ankle sprain where they actually twist their talus around and it pops the ligaments apart a little bit and you get damage to that joint there. The other one is fibrocartilaginous or symphyseal. Now these joints are fantastic. Most people say symphyseal and right away, oh, pubic symphysis, I know where that is. Yeah, totally. Pubic symphysis is a prime example, but so are each of your intervertebral discs. Each of those counts as well. Okay, and one thing I like to bring up is a lot of people don't even realize the most strong stabilizer of their spine is the intervertebral disc. And in fact, it's the annulus fibrosus that really does that. Okay, so if we scroll down, we can go ahead and see joints with a cavity. Those are your synovial joints. They have a synovial membrane. They make nice synovial fluid, and it goes on from there. So here we can see gliding joints, hinge joints, pivot joints, condyloid joints, trochoid joints. Well, that's another name for a pivot joint. What am I saying? Saddle joint, and then ball and socket joint. And we'll go into those in detail here as we talk about the joints of the body. And lastly, we finish off with tight packed and loose packed positions. I like to bring this up because it's a way for us to recognize the biomechanics of joints and what might be involved with injuries to those joints. So let's go ahead and move on to the joints themselves. So again, what is a joint? It's where one osseous structure meets another osseous structure. That is a joint. And I talk about synovial fluid for nutrient exchange. We talk briefly about requiring, well, which are required for nutrient exchange, reduce friction, also degeneration and osteoarthritis, subluxations and luxations, cavitations and crepitus as well, showing roughening of those. But let's go on to the next one where we are going to blow this up and talk about details. So if you have this book, this is on page 16 of the muscle manual, the total list of bones and, total list of joints of the body. And let's go ahead and start with that. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. So we've got our bones, we've got our joints of the body based on that 214 number, plus or minus the variation that we get there. Okay, so what do we have? We have spine. We have the spine having about 183 joints, upper limb 88, lower limb 88 joints, and then skull 109. I know, this is amazing. People look at this and they're like, wow, there's more joints in your spine than there is in your skull. So we'll run through each of these lists right off the bat, and then we'll cycle through and talk about what is a joint, points of variation, and how we can make our number be what we think it is. So to begin with, cervical spine, there's 31 joints that are going to take place there. The atlanto-occipital joints, you have the occipital condyles hanging down on the upper portion, or the lower portion, I should say, of the occipital bone, and they articulate with the upper portion of C1. Atlantodental joint, you got your dens that sticks up, and then we have on the very front there where the anterior arch of C1 is, there's an articulation there, a little synovial joint. Now there is a ligament that runs on the back behind the dens, the transverse ligament of the dens, but that ligament is not an osseous structure, so we don't consider that an actual joint, even though it helps maintain stability of that joint. Then we have the C1, C2 articular facet. So this is the lateral mass of C1 coming out with its inferior articular facet and the superior articular facet of C2. Then we have zygapophyseal joints, and those run down. There's 2 on each side, and those are going to run all the way down the remaining 5 cervical vertebrae. This is then followed by the intervertebral discs, and there are going to be 6 intervertebral discs running all the way down to T1. There is no disc between CO, C1 and C1, C2. Then we have these uncovertebral joints, also known as the joints of Luschka. Now there's some controversy here, but you can see on most human cervical vertebrae, at the very edge of the intervertebral bodies in the upper part, they have these little angles that come up. And those create more stability of the cervical spine, and those might be considered the uncovertebral joints or joints of Luschka. They are bilateral, and they run up and down the entire cervical spine as well. Then we go into the thoracic spine. 98 joints in your thoracic spine. There are 24 zygapophyseal joints or facet joints made up of a superior and inferior articular facet articulating together, oriented approximately 60 degrees in the horizontal plane. We also have 12 intervertebral discs that run down. We also have costovertebral joints, and there are a lot of costovertebral joints. Other than the first rib, where it comes in and only articulates with the T1 vertebral body, the second rib, third rib, fourth rib, all the way down, wind up articulating with 2 vertebral bodies. So that means that rib number 2 articulates with T1 vertebral body and T2 vertebral body. And we see this carried on as we go down the spine, as we go down the thoracic spine in particular in this case. What else do we have? So we have costovertebral joints, then we have costotransverse joints. This is where the tubercle of our rib articulates with the transverse process of the same thoracic vertebrae, and it makes a joint, synovial joint, where those slide back and forth. It should be noted though that the, what are we going to say here? It should be noted that the lower 2 vertebrae, so that'll be T11 and T12, the actual ribs don't articulate with those transverse costal joints. They're free floating out in space with that. The next thing to bring up is going to be the subcostal joint, or sorry, scapulocostal joint, pardon me, scapulocostal joint. And what the scapulocostal joint is, it's the articulation between your ribs and between your, well, it's really serratus anterior in the front of your scapula. This is not a synovial joint. This is not a bone meets bone joint. This is a muscle sliding over top of other muscles. In fact, it slides over serratus posterior superior when you're looking at it. So for this one, what you have to realize is, you can see this on cats especially. If you watch like lions or big cats or even your house cat walking around and you see their shoulders moving back and forth, it's amazing to watch. It's kind of neat to see. Not a true joint, not included in this number. Interesting point of realization, the only point of bony articulation of your upper extremity to the axial skeleton is right there at your sternoclavicular joints. Otherwise, this is all free floating. When I'm in the cadaver lab, one of the ways we do our dissections is we separate all the muscles around and just have to pop this joint apart, and you can take an entire upper limb apart like that. Okay, continuing down the spine, we've got the sternum, okay, axial skeleton. We're coming down to the sternum here. So the sternum has sternocostal joints. There are 14 sternocostal joints that come in there from your true ribs coming in. There are also costal chondral joints where the ribs join up to all of the cartilage around your rib cage here, okay? All the cartilage around your rib cage. Then we have manubrial sternal joint, that angle of the mandible, angle of the sternum. We have the xiphy-sternal joint where your xiphoid process meets your sternum. And then we also have sternoclavicular joints. Again, SC, only point of bony articulation, attachment of the upper extremity to the axial skeleton. All right, so then we move on to the lumbar, and there are approximately lumbar pelvis, coccyx area. There are approximately 20 joints right there. We can see zygapophyseal joints, then there will be 10 of those. Intervertebral discs, there will be 5 of those, unless of course you have anatomical variation where you have that L5. L6. We should go back and look at those ribs too, because if you're looking at the ribs, you can have cervical ribs and lumbar ribs that could give you extra articulations. All right, and then we have, rarely an L6, we didn't count it, sacroiliac joints, bilateral, so there are 2 SI joints. And then you have S5 to the first coccyx bone, which is usually a joint. And then from there on down, they usually fuse. So we didn't put those as separate joints, but this could be an area where you have extra joints. And then around to the front of the pelvis, you can see it right here, is that wonderful pubic symphysis joint that you have at the front. So that gets you through the spine, 183-ish joints. Next one is going to be upper limb. So upper limb, what do we have here? 88 joints. Acromioclavicular joint, glenohumeral joint, okay? Humeral ulnar joint, humeral radial joint, radial ulnar joint, proximal radial ulnar joint, distal radial ulnar joint. Then you get into the wrists, and things get pretty complicated on the wrist, but if you take your time, you can count your way through it. Excuse me. You can count your way through it. So we have like radius to the scaphoid, radius to the triquetrum, radius to the ulna. Sorry, well, we already said that one. Ulna to the ulnar triquetrium joint, where you have that triangular fibrocartilage that fills up that last little space, right? We also have scaphotrapezium, scaphotrapezoid, scaphocapitate, scapholunate. So scaphoid articulations are taken care of. Lunocapitulate, lunotriquetrum, lunohamate. Lunate articulations are taken care of. Triquetrio trapeziform, triquetrio hamate, hamate capitate, capitate trapezoid, trapezoid trapezium. All of these little mini articulations. What I'll try and do is show a little cadaver video of how you can look at the back of the wrist, open it up, or maybe front of the wrist. I forget which one I'm going to show here. But you can look at those and you can see how they actually all articulate together. A great way to do a dissection, great way for you to understand the carpal bones themselves. And then the hamate with metacarpals, and the capitate, this MC stands for metacarpal, 2 and 3. Trapezoid with metacarpals. Then we go with the 5 metacarpals into your hand. Then we go into the phalanges, okay? Then we go into the proximal phalanges, middle phalanges, distal phalanges, all the way through there that are making up dips and pips and MCP joints. And then we included the sesamoid bones of your thumb, and there are 2 of them making articulations right there, okay? Sesamoid bones of your thumb. So that will get you 88 joints in the upper extremity. I know, this takes a while. Stay with me. We're going to get through it. All right. Next thing we're going to see is for us to look at the lower limb. Again, another 88 joints. Luckily for us, the way that this picture works out, I've got it laid out right here. So you can see the lower limb and you can see all of the joints right here that we're going to go through. So acetabulofemoral, tibiofemoral, Oh, what? Fibular femoral? No, there's no such joint. The fibula does not articulate with the femur, but there is a patellofemoral, there's a proximal tibiofibular and a distal tibiofibular. Then we go into tibiotalus, and then we go through, just like we did for the carpals, we're going to fade now into all of the tarsal joints. So I have calcaneotalus, calcaneocuboid, talonavicular. What is that? Spring ligament, transverse calcaneonavicular ligament. Okay. I've also got the navicular cuboid, navicular medial cuneiform, navicular intermediate cuneiform, navicular lateral cuneiform, navicular intermediate cuneiform, intermediate lateral cuneiform, and then I have to go back up to the top of my list here. Cubolateral cuneiform, cubo fourth metatarsal, cubo fifth metatarsal, lateral cuneiform third metatarsal. Do you see how this process is the same as what we saw in the hand? So eventually you get into your metatarsal joints where they articulate with each other, and then there's proximal tarsal bones. And then we go into metatarsal phalangeal joints, interphalangeal joint on the big toe, just like we had an interphalangeal joint on the thumb only. And then we go proximal interphalangeal joints, distal interphalangeal joints, and let's get another two, okay, right here for the medial and lateral sesamoid bones. Whoa, let me zoom in again. And that will get you through the lower extremity, 88 joints. Now we're going to come into the skull. And if you really want to understand joints of the skull, the best thing for you to do is get a 3D model of the skull that comes apart. I'll flash a picture of one up right here, because then you can take the bones apart and put them back together and see exactly how they are. Or you can look at some high-end detailed computer resolutions of it where you can see all of these joints. So temporomandibular joints, we have one on either side, and you can argue with me and say, well, isn't it really classified as an above the articular disc and below the articular disc? Yeah, but really it's where one bone meets another, so we're going to classify it as one joint. We also have 6 inner ear joints. This is bilaterally, of course, where the malleus, incus, and stapes all meet each other. And even that oval window deep inside your middle ear in that transition to the inner ear is also part of the temporal bone. So that's where you see another one of those joints taking place. Teeth. This is one where you could take it out right away and you get your number down to 456 if you wanted to, all right? There are approximately 32 teeth. They are like bone in structure. We classify them as a gomphosis for the type of joint. I include them in that number of 472. Then we break down the sutures of the skull, and there are 69 sutures in your skull that you can go ahead and look at. Right and left side that we can go through. Extrasutural bones are common right here. There are bilateral and unilateral sutures. I am not going to go through this. You can look at this list in detail. I'll flash up a picture of a skull where we can kind of see the parietal sphenoid, parietal temporal, all of that. We can see the occipital bones. I'll maybe show you a picture of an internal vault of the skull as well where we can see that. All of that is available, so we can understand what's going on with all of this. And it'll get us to our very end of this information. So that would take you through approximately 472 joints. On this other page right here, page 17 of the muscle manual, I also included all of the ranges of motion for each of these joints in the body, such that you might use them on a physical exam. The reason I'm taking the time to go through this is a lot of people don't believe this number. If you're here for new information, this is the right place for you to be. If you're here for confirmation of what you already know, there's multiple other sources that will give you different numbers. I've taken the time to walk you through it, and I hope that you find this useful. Even breaking down the what am I looking at here? Even breaking down the spinal levels. This is from White and Punjabi's Clinical Biomechanics of the Spine. And where else is this from? American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, actually. That's where this information comes from. So you can see the range of motion by segment. Again, this varies from person to person, right? Yeah, I'm not going to talk about cartilage or end fields or anything. I wouldn't mind trying to get you really quick, though, to those pictures of the skull so you can actually see them and look at them in detail. So give me 2 seconds to flip ahead through the book. Yeah, so there you go. So here we can see the skull. We can divide the skull into the cranium and the face. And the cranium we can put in frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, sphenoid, ethmoid bones. And then on the face we can do all the remainder of the bones. So cranium is in light blue here. Face is in kind of that peachy orange color. And then I can go ahead and zoom in, and we can look at each individual one of these bones. Number 17 does not exist in everybody. It is a sutural bone or Wormian bone. They are a variation. The other bone that we didn't include was the hyoid bone in our list, and the hyoid bone doesn't include it because it doesn't articulate with another bone. It is free floating in the supra and infrahyoid muscles. In fact, stylohyoid and omohyoid and digastric, and all of those good friends are holding this muscle in place right there. But you can see the different articulations and joints that take place around each one of these skull bones. When a baby is born, you have fontanelles, and these bones need to move. Well, first of all, when the baby comes through the birth canal, they need to slide over top of each other so the baby can make it out. And then as the brain grows, all of these bones expand out. Yeah, moving down, you can see an anterior view. We've also got other views as well. Let me just zoom back here just a little bit. Yeah, so TMJ you can look at above and below the capsule. This is a pediatric skull right here, so has not reached skeletal maturity. Don't have to go through all the muscles. And then another site or location that you want to look at for the actual, don't need to do that. For the actual joints of the skull would be a superior view where you've done a section through the top of the skull. And here we can see, this one was actually a lot of fun to make. This is from Gray's Anatomy. But what I've done is I've colored it in here a little bit different so you can see all the junctions of all the bones, right? So we would have just classified the sphenoid and the temporal bone as one joint. Even though it articulates here, there's a separation and articulates again. That's still just sphenoid and temporal. And then we would go back into sphenoid occipital, and you name it, you can see them all. So hopefully you found this useful. I'll thank you very much for your time. Maybe I should just come out of this really quick. Stop my share. Yeah, so I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to make it through this entire thing. If you found this useful, great. If you have any points of constructive feedback, I am all ears to hear what else we may have missed or we should add or should take out. You can find me online, Dr. Nikita Vizniak, on our website, prohealthsys.com, or you can find us in one of any of the 20 books I have written plus at this time. All right, thank you very much and have a good day. Hopefully we'll see you again soon. Bye.